Andrew, as I mentioned, you're on the central coast of New South Wales for another very interesting day, door knocking with the candidate.
Yes, it was. I was out with the Labor candidate, Gordon Reid. He's 29. He's an emergency doctor who's worked at the Gosford and Wyong hospitals. And I have to say, if the doors we knocked are any indication, Lucy Wicks and Scott Morrison have their work cut out in this seat. Now, so much so, Kieran, that I went and had a look at the booth results from the last election to make sure it wasn't a stitch-up, the streets we've been doing. It was in the Minor Beach area. And at that time, in that particular result, it was around 50-50. So this is contested area that we were door knocking, but not a lot of great things to hear for the government or the local member here. A suggestion from a couple of people that Lucy Wicks had promised things at the last election and not delivered on them. And Gordon Reid himself, being the emergency doctor, he got a pretty good reception. So we know this seat is 4.2%. The coalition actually increased its margin from around the 2s at the last poll, but I'd say it's definitely coming in. And I had heard it is really on Labor's list, and I'm not surprised. I mean, there's nothing scientific about this, but from what I've heard this morning, I'm not surprised around this. Real concerns here for Scott Morrison. I'm going to play first. We got a couple of people on camera. This lady called Jenny, she says she's a swing voter. She's voted Liberal before, but she is voting Labor this time. She thinks, she's pretty sure anyway, because she's not impressed with Scott Morrison. Have a listen. Yeah. Jenny, I think you were saying you often change your vote. Is that the case, and which way are you looking this time?
I do change my vote, but basically just to see who's doing the best job at the time. And this time I'm probably going for Albanese, just because I think we need a change. And some of the things that Scott Morrison has done, I'm not really over the moon about what he's done, and I just think we need a bit of change.
Is there anything in particular you can put your hand on, that finger on, that Scott Morrison's done that you don't like?
Just the fact that he wasn't around for the floods and the fires and all that sort of stuff. That was a glaring thing for me, was that he wasn't basically there to help his people.
Now, just like the South Coast seat of Gilmore in New South Wales yesterday, local issues were predominant. A lot of people talking about roads, talking about potholes. Rains have made it worse. Of course, this is a council responsibility and perhaps a state government responsibility, but it doesn't matter. Again, you've got both sides here in the federal seat campaigning on roads because it's such a big issue. Shows how lousy the roads are in regional New South Wales. Anyone who's travelled on them could probably attest to that. But also interesting in this door knock came up some issues around climate change. Even a federal ICAC came up. Let's listen first to Linda. She was talking about how she would vote depending on who had the best stance in relation to climate change. This area has experienced some floods as well. What are the issues that you think matter to you in terms of your vote for this seat?
It's really important for me to move completely away from fossil fuel as soon as possible and to support all the local industries who are engaging in innovative renewable energy. Obviously here we experience a lot of coastal erosion due to climate change. It's real, we see it. And the other really important thing for me is NBN and telecommunications, because my family now studies and works from home, so we really need to be on the internet.
Here's a gentleman called Luke. He talked about an integrity commission, but he also talked about Lucy Wicks making local promises at the last election which hadn't been delivered on. What do you think of Lucy Wicks versus Gordon Reid for this seat?
Gordon Reid, every day. Every day and twice on a Sunday.
Why is that?
Look, I've not seen hide nor hair of our Member of Parliament, Lucy Wicks, since the last election campaign, really. She makes tons of promises. She's even making promises again in the run-up for this election that she made in the run-up for the last election, and they've just not delivered on in between.
What sort of things?
The Peninsula Entertainment and Leisure recreational district down here at Umina. They were looking at redeveloping the oval and some of the amenities that are there used by a lot of the sporting clubs, especially young families in the area. It was promised 3 years ago, a number was announced 3 years ago, and she's just re-announced the same number saying, oh, well, we were doing costings and planning and all the rest of it in between. You know, it's obvious that it's all just pork barrelling, basically.
So I do wonder how much of an issue this is for the coalition government. Not the big picture issues on the economy or how to handle national security in China. Let's not forget at the last election they made a number of local promises. We know a lot of those commuter car parks haven't come to fruition. You can lose trust, it occurred to me, with the individual communities if you don't deliver on those sorts of things. Obviously there are some members who would have delivered better than others. Someone like David Coleman in Banks, they often talk about delivering, for example, but perhaps Lucy Wicks has an issue here. So I spoke to Gordon Reid, the young Labor candidate, about why people were so big on the roads, why this local issue was dominating here as it has in Gilmore when I visited that yesterday.
Road infrastructure is one of our major issues here on the Central Coast.
And what's Labor promising?
So Labor's made a commitment in the last week to upgrade Avoca Drive, so putting in $30 million of investment to improve the road stretch at Avoca Drive. It's one of the major pinch points and congestion areas for the Central Coast, and a missing link between here, the peninsula, and also the Erina-Terrigal area where the beaches are located.
So why is the emergency doctor doing this? Well, he was in Young Labor. He came out of that and then worked as a doctor, but decided to come back and run as a candidate. I asked him about this and I asked him about his chances.
I work as a doctor in the emergency department. I've worked across multiple sites within the Central Coast. So I've worked at Wyong Hospital, Gosford Hospital and Woy Woy when I was a resident.
You give yourself every chance?
Look, we're going to continue to work extremely hard here, extremely hard right across the Robertson electorate, and we'll see what happens on May 21.
So in those Teal independent seats, you expect climate change and ICAC and the like to come up. This is the sort of area where you'd expect boat turnbacks and those sorts of issues to come up half the time. But I think the problem with the coalition on this front is when there aren't boats on the horizon, it's hard to register that discontent with that sort of thing. So I asked Gordon Reid, look, why are you hearing about climate change and ICAC? How often are you hearing about it? Now, out in the Dornoch, I also heard climate change.
Yes.
ICAC.
Yes.
ICAC probably surprises me a bit more than climate change. Have you heard a bit of that around the place?
So people want integrity and people want to be able to trust their elected representatives, and they want to know that there's no corruption in the federal parliament. And the only way that can be addressed and the only way that we can move forward is by the implementation of a federal anti-corruption commission. So absolutely, we hear it right across the Central Coast. It's not limited to just here.